So welcome to the Modern Frequency interview. I'm Robert. Danny, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too. I want to start with how did you get involved to become a producer?
Oh, and just overall,
Yeah, overall, where did you get the knack
okay,
to become
that's
a
good.
producer?
Well, when I was a kid, I mean, it all started with I probably was about 11 or 12, and I saw a poster of Jimi Hendrix.
Nice.
In the store in the mall that sold like guitar records and like a couple guitars. And I just remember seeing that poster, man, and I didn't know what it meant.
Mhm.
It was the famous one where he's like all in blue velvet and he's got the white strat. And I knew, I'm like, whatever that is, that's what I want. And it
Oh,
took me a couple more years of driving my old man crazy. And I finally, at 13, I got a guitar. I got him to buy me an electric guitar, but I had a friend that had a guitar down the street. And like, so I was always playing his guitar more than he did. And like, it was just one of those things. And it wasn't like I was born with all this natural musical ability, like far from it, but it was just one of those things where I don't know, man. When I think back on it, it's kind of crazy because how do you know as a kid? And it wasn't like now where like the parents, like if the kids show any talent, because trust me, I've worked with a lot of bands that are managed by their parents. A normal thing now, if the kid shows any sign of talent, the parents are all over it, right?
oh
And
yeah,
those
sure.
where we were left to our own devices, and that's really what ignited it. But then what was kind of cool for me, and I always say I was really lucky just at the point in time I came up because from 13 to 15, I wanted to be the world's greatest guitar player.
Mm.
But somewhere along the lines, I kind of always had a knack for putting stuff together. Like I used to take two ghetto blasters, two tape recorders with speakers and cassette, and I'd lay a part on one and I'd play it back and stick it between the amp and the other one. And I would start making these like tapes, a year and a half into playing guitar. And I just would play along with stuff. And in high school, the coolest kid was always the kid who could like play eruption note for note or whatever, right? And I was always too like lazy or attention span deficit to learn anything. Like I'd learn the beginning and then I just start playing my own thing. And I always had a knack for sort of putting things together. And then I sort of got my hands on a drum machine and a sampler and first a Roland Juno 106 and a little Porta Studio, and I started putting tracks together. But this was before that was really commonplace, and that was sort of I kind of realized like something inside me. I had a knack for just putting things together, and the few times that we got access to studios and like to go with bands I was in, I was always ended up telling everybody what to do, and so it just kind of was an organic thing for me. I just fell into it. I always just seemed to kind of, for whatever stage I was at.
Yeah. How
So
hard
that
is it to learn guitar though for you? How hard was it for you to learn it? Was it an easy
Well,
task?
the one thing I've never been the world's greatest guitar player or bass player, but the crazy thing is it always sounded good. Even like I always had a good tone, right? It always stuck to whatever. Like I don't know where that comes from. And then the crazy thing, I'll tell you, because my whole thing is, especially these days with musicians, so much emphasis is placed on how to play,
Yeah.
right? And you see these kids, these little like 11-year-old girls playing Eruption and all these they're playing Neil Peart on the drums and they're playing the shit. It's like, oh my God, and that's fantastic. But nobody ever puts any focus on what to play and the choices you make. And that's when you get to the highest level of music, that expression that's where the art comes into the equation. When you can develop your own musical personality and it becomes an extension of you and there's a consistency. So I kind of do that with the whole studio. It's not like an instrument. It's harder to do it on one instrument. I mean, if you think about it, how many guitar players have come along where you know Eddie Van Halen the second you hear him. I think the last guy to really do it is Tom Morello, where Tom,
Oh
you hear Tom,
yeah. Oh yeah.
oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Tom's the last guy to really just do that, like to that point where not only is it completely identifiable, but he's got his own lane. He got his own little mixing the hip hop sensibilities, but it's hard as you like. And so, like to me, that was always the thing. But using everything at my disposal, and as I got older and as I grew musically, I had access to stuff as it became available. Where like if you're a kid today, I mean, where do you even begin? I mean, there's so much stuff at your fingertips.
Right.
So I think I'm a product of the time I grew up in, and you know, just having that wanting it so bad, just why I wasn't the most talented kid at all, but I wanted it more than anybody else maybe around me, you know, and that was really that you know, that's when I like meet younger kids and I look at them and I'm like, I'm more concerned with, you know, their attitude and they have to do it. They're compelled to do it, not they're doing it because they're chasing this or that or whatever. And I think that's usually a part of the equation of when it ends up, you know, when greatness ends up in the equation,
Yes.
that's one of the things they have in common. They're compelled. Like Michael was compelled. That's why he was working with me outside. He could have laid on his, you know, I mean, look, INXS was doing great, but the problem with being when you're in the biggest band in the world for a little while, I mean, they had that moniker and you get that big, and it's not just them, it's every band that reaches that level. It becomes about maintaining what you have, maybe a little more than taking risks and growing, and then that becomes the balance, you know, and Michael needed that charge of, you know, just always stimulating wherever and seeing where we could take it. Like, where can we take it? Where can we go? You know, and he had his voice, like I was saying on the last thing I did, it's just, his voice told me will tell you what to do. The great singers, you could put them up a cappella like I did on this song and literally put it to a click and start playing it. You'll hear the song. It's there. It's in the vocals. They're telling you where to go if you listen and you know how to tap into it. It's kind of crazy.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
I had that with a Bowie remix, the Little Wonder remix I did, the slower one. It was the same thing, and I always say, like with Reeves Gabrels, and I always said, like when you're working with Bowie or Alice Cooper, it's like playing Cowboys and Indians, right? And you've got so much stuff to tap into. But same with Bowie, I put that mix up, the vocal from Little Wonder, and just started playing guitar to it. I could hear the whole thing finished. It was crazy, and it was like, as a fan, I'm going to make what I want to hear, which is some hybrid of Space Oddity and like, you know, changes and like whatever it may be. I was tapping into all my reference points and then trying to channel it back into something fresh, you know?
Right. That's cool. That's very cool.
So hopefully
Speaking
that
of,
answers your question.
yeah, definitely. No, you were talking about Michael Hutchence. You became close just 2 years before his death. Were you shocked when he died?
Well, of course. I mean, you know, because I mean, that's the thing that nobody, or not nobody, but a lot of people seem to overlook. Like Michael was 37. Like nobody expected him to die, least of all him. Like we weren't, you know what I mean? So yeah, it was absolutely shocking. But within that, you know, there was a lot going on with him personally at the time, and he was dealing with the tabloid press because of the relationship he was in. So he was under a lot of pressure and he was under a lot of stress. And then I came to find out later, I didn't know the details, that he had, you know, had a brain injury that had messed with him. And so he was dealing with a lot of stuff. And that's been sort of the beauty of this journey because, you know, going back, and I don't know how much you know about the history of this music, but essentially Michael reached out to me in about 1995. He had been working on a solo record and trying to work with different people. And he connected with Andy Gill and they got some traction. They had about 6, 7 songs, whatever. I got brought in to sort of produce and really help him hone in the sound he was looking for. And we started making this record together, the three of us. And then me and Michael started independently writing. And we got the record. We had about 12 songs that were basically done. And then he died. Then a little time went by and we finished that record. And then about 10 years after he died, that's when this material surfaced. It was like sort of like a tape locker. And it was remnants of different things he had been going around working on. But it never really saw the light of day. So then, you know, the process of going through that, it was all on 2-inch tape. So we had to digit. There was a whole thing to go through to see what was there. But once we started to realize some of it was, you know, worthy of, you know, really like developing and producing, the guy that I was working with at the time running the state, we both agreed that there was no point in just putting a record out because with the V2 record had come out and there was no one to promote it and it was a new label and outside of Australia, it never really saw the light of day. So we thought, okay, let's make a documentary to accompany him. We'll tell the story of the music, which that only took about 8 years to get made. And then finally it did. And some of this music was featured in that, but it was only aired in Australia and New Zealand. And that was in 2017. So that brings us to where we are now, which is, you know, finally after going back and forth, COVID and a bunch of other stuff, that just, you know, I was trying to get the plan was to recut the Australian documentary, release it internationally, and then release all this music with the international doc. But it just
Didn't pan
like
out.
100 things. So the bottom line is let's put out a song. Let's get this going. It's time. It's like enough time has gone by because all the fans know about it because they heard little bits of it in the movie and stuff. So people have been aware of it. And there's some stuff nobody's heard. And it's the right time to do this, you know?
All right.
So
How
that, you got a clear understanding of where we are. Like that's how we got where we are now.
yeah, I was actually going to ask you how, why did it take so long and all that jazz, but you just answered all the all that in a
Oh,
nutshell.
I mean, yeah.
Um,
Million reasons.
how do you go about preserving such a legacy? And like, how do you, I mean, we talked about Bowie for a little bit, and you said that it just came to you, you know what I'm saying? Like, especially after their death, how do you go about working with some of the greats?
And that is a good ass question, bro. You're good, man. I love good questions. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. I mean, the whole point is, like I said, and trying to keep this on a positive tip and keep a standard. I mean, I've said it. You've got to, INXS, Bowie, any of these kind of artists. Luckily for me, and I mean, I say this with total humility, but I've had those opportunities. I've done the Bowie stuff. I've worked with David. I got to meet him. You two sent me material. I finished songs for the like. So it's not like I'm just some guy who found the stuff, you know, and luckily I knew Michael, and Michael was the first major, like he sought me out after the Black Rape record was released because he was just a huge fan of that record. He was always on a mission to kind of discover new music. And when he heard that record, he got really excited because I think in his mind, that was like the closest thing he ever heard to where he wanted to go beyond what he had already kind of become successful for doing, which they were fantastic at it. I don't know if there was a band better at taking dance music and guitars and beats and funky shit and mixing rock together. And, you know, Michael's lyrics were always really, you know, he's always saying something. If you go back and listen to those songs, and to feed into your point, man, the standard of INXS was always really high. The Max Q record is a really good record. So that's the whole thing. And the way how you do it, I mean, I think is you just stay true to yourself and the mission. And the mission with Michael was always, you know, we're going to go wherever the music takes us, and we're not going to rule anything out, because he told me part of the liberating thing and part of the reason he wanted to do something outside the band, it was never an either or thing. The band is what gives all of this meaning. It was never, I would never be arrogant enough to say like, oh, better. It's not about that. It's just letting him flex some muscles he might not get to flex in that situation, because instead of a band dynamic where, hey, he's hearing something in his head, that could be a guitar part. You don't have the whole, I'm the guitar player, you're the, you know, and every band has that. So there's no fault in it. And that in this situation was what made it a little different. Everything's built around his vocals. It's all there to complement his vocals. And we had an agreement. No idea was out of bounds, you know, because sometimes you got to go to the wrong place to get to the right place. You know what I mean? So we
Oh
just
yeah.
go where it took us. And so to answer your question, you know, it's staying true to that. And that was the mission. Like, not, oh, what can I do that's going to work? No, I'm just chasing that same shit we were chasing together. And it's easy for me because that's what I do anyways. I'm not trying to, I learned that lesson a long time ago. Like, you know, I'm very lucky that for better or worse, you know, at least whatever I've done and leave behind, generally people come to me because they want me. They don't want some half-assed version of somebody else. So like, I'd rather have that and have 100 people know who I am. You know what I'm saying? So that it makes it a little easier for me in that sense, because as long as I stay true to myself and the mission, those questions tend to work themselves out. And then it just becomes a matter of, is this really worthy of being heard? And, you know, the thing that I'm the most pleased about, and I'll let you get another question in a second, is that the response to the song. I mean, everybody seems to love the song. It's crazy. There's not one negative response about the song. And that's, when it's all said and done, all that matters. You know, you
Yes.
can't make the fans like the music. You can't make people like it. They're either going to like it or they're not. You put it out there. So that was the most valuable thing about this, you know.
Very cool. How difficult is it not to let your own influence and style seep in with whoever you are producing?
I'm sorry, say that again.
How difficult is it not to let your own style seep into whoever you're helping out, whoever you're producing at the time?
Well, it isn't for me, and again, because I come from the Bruce Lee school of like, a philosophy, which is my style is I have no style. And if you look at all the different, that's why I've been able to, I think, work with all the people. There's a cohesiveness kind of thing that I like. I like a lot of low end. I like beats. I like bass. I just like everything to be. But I think over the years I've grown and I've refined my style too. Like less has become more, and I don't have to. I don't spend as I spend more time doing less, where I used to spend less time doing more. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's like I kind of know generally, not always, but where I want to go and how to get there a lot. So, but yeah, I mean, and that's casting. Casting is everything in life, especially with like musicians. Like there's certain musicians that do a certain thing. And if you bring them into play on a record, you bring them in and let them be them. You're not bringing in so and so like Mike Garson, who played all the keyboards on Aladdin Sane. And I mean, he's an avant-garde jazz guy that knows how to make that work in a rock and roll thing. So I brought him in on different records, and I was telling him, you don't tell him what to play, man. He's
Right,
here.
right.
We want him here. You let him go. Just let him do his thing. You can't tell a guy. It's like trying to tell, I don't know, what Stephen Hawking about, because of string theory. It's like, dude, that guy's so over our heads. Just let him. All we know is that you like all that stuff he did over there. Seems like a good match here. Let him be him. So I think it's that just to certain degrees. It's
Very
cast.
cool. Yeah, yeah, very cool, very cool. Your band, Black Grape, reunited in 2010. What does it hold for Black Grape?
Well, to be honest with you, me and Sean are still really good friends and stuff, and we talk occasionally, but that was sort of his thing. I wasn't really involved with the reformation part of it. I think they went off and made a record with Youth. But Sean's really he's a really unique individual because I mean, first of all, in England, he's like a national treasure. And Sean was the first person I had any real commercial success with, and we're like brothers. So I love him and I support whatever he does and just wish them the best. But I honestly didn't have anything directly to do with any of the recent Black Grape stuff. That he did that, but he did it with Youth, who's a great producer. I mean, he did the Verb and he was in Killing Joke. And so yeah, that's own for yeah, I didn't really have much to do with that. But yeah, it's cool shit though. And he's out touring, he's in England. He's because he's got the Mondays, he goes out as Sean and talks. I think him and Alan McGee do like a thing where they go and do not spoken word, but they kind of sit down and tell stories. So he's got so many dimensions. He had a show about finding like chasing after flying saucers. And so he's like a national treasure in England. So
That's
Black Grape is just one facet of his sort of little empire.
yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. Um, I don't know if this will fall into your realm of things, but do you like to be producer or do you want to be a performer? I mean, which would you rather do?
Well, I'm really lucky, dude, because like in my first band, Proper Grounds, we were the first band signed to Maverick. So we were managed by Guy Osiri. He was still in high school, and we were
Uh,
all coming up together, man. And Guy got the A&R gig at Maverick, and we had a bidding war. The two buzz bands in LA were us and Rage Against the Machine. And
really?
yeah, man, at the same time. And I always tell kids now, you know who my competition was? You know how good Rage Against the Machine was? Like, I mean, they were at a whole nother level, then and still. But you know how it is when bands are looking at different bands. And we had a few labels looking at us, but of course we went with Maverick, and Madonna signing us was a story in itself. And it was a similar dynamic. It was me and Sean Kennedy, the rapper. So I've always sort of worked in this dynamic like I worked with Michael. So
Mhm.
that's sort of the most comfortable. And then with Sean, he was so generous because when the Black Grape record took off, he invited me to come and play when I could do it. So I didn't like have to grind on tour, but I got to play Reading Festival. So I know what it's like to headline in front of 60,000 people and they're singing one of your songs. I've had that experience, but I'm really a producer.
Yeah, yeah,
Bring that back in the studio. It gives me a little, there's some producers that are just purely studio rats that have never or couldn't or wouldn't be on a stage. So to have that opportunity, I mean, I've always just wanted to be a musician. I'm really just a musician who learned all these, skills so I could play guitar on the record. That's all I wanted to
yeah. That's so
do.
interesting though. You mentioned Madonna, obviously David Bowie, U2, and all that. Did you ever feel like an insane amount of pressure to get things done? Did you ever put a deadline on your work? Do you have deadlines that you go by?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good question. Like with the Michael thing, the double-edged sword of it's been that luxury of like coming back to it and working on it. Like this song, for instance, there's a version of it that's in the film that's still warranted. We could have released that version. I mean, it was good to go, but then I had more time and more time. So you don't want to screw it up. Like Bono has this saying, it's baked. You got to know when it's baked, right? Because you can mess stuff up if you work on it too long. But I've also done composing for television. So if you talk about a deadline, I did a season of network television, a show called The Defenders on CBS, where you're literally when they're mixing this week's episode, you've already started scoring next week's episode. So it's like composer boot camp. And I've worked on movies. I actually like parameters and deadlines to work within, but more, not so much if you're making a record per se, more like if it's like a scene in a movie or something where it's like, it's actually really helpful, because
Yeah.
with records, it's all about the music, right?
Right.
And that's why a lot of, directors will go, that's how I got into scoring, because a lot of directors will be like, oh, I love so-and-so's band. They're amazing. But they make their music to please themselves as artists and their audience. When you're working to picture, you're serving a film, there's parameters to work within. It's a completely different dynamic. So I've kind of understood those two worlds. So I was able to bridge that gap a little bit, and come in as a composer, but help with bridge the gap between the score and then the source music. And that's sort of how I got into it. So, it just depends on the situation really, but, deadlines are generally a good thing, as long as you don't get like back-ended into them, meaning like I remember when I went to meet with the U2 guys, like they were really they had booked the pop tour before the record was done. And Bono said he'd never do that again because and that was pressure. That's real pressure. Like that's a 300 person crew and promoters and hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, that's real pressure. And so deadlines can be good, and it just depends on the situation and how clear of vision you are. Because what you don't want is to end up compromising because of a deadline, so it's a balance, it's because that's where experience comes in, and where producers, because you have a good producer, hopefully they see that stuff and can recognize, because every situation's different. So there's no one answer,
For sure, for sure. What is next for you? What are you planning on doing next? Who are you producing next? What are you doing? What's in the future for you?
Well, the Michael thing has taken up a lot of time, and obviously we're focused on one way, but there's potentially more to come here. I'm working with
On Michael's stuff, on Michael's stuff.
Yeah. On
All right,
Michael.
great. Great.
Yeah, and then other than that, I'm just doing what I do, which is, I'm developing a music library right now with a music supervisor friend of mine who's worked on a lot of movies. We worked on a lot of big movies together, Steven Soderbergh movies, like really cool stuff. And
Nice.
we're kind of mining a catalog, and there's some masters we're reworking, and so I've got all kinds of stuff going on always. But the Michael thing's kind of my focus right now, really, to be honest, because there's a lot to do. Because
Yeah, we all miss Michael. He was an incredible front man.
Yeah, no, for sure, man. For
I mean,
sure.
I grew up on some of his stuff, so when he passed in '97, it was a shock to everyone. Really.
And that's a big reason why, because I mean, when it's all, like I said, he was my friend, and he was the first real like exposure I got to like being around like a massive international rock star, like, expensive dinners, dodging paparazzi, and like just that for me, it was amazing because I was a kid. It was like my first time ever. It was what I imagined being around a rock star would be like, and
Sure.
he lived up to it all and more, but he was a really, really good-hearted dude. And he opened some doors for me, introduced me to Mick Jagger, just a bunch of things that happened just out of he was a really generous soul.
Right.
And
Right.
because of the way he died and just the way the situation has sort of languished, it's really time for him to get the recognition he deserves, and